I'm trying to think of some way of, I think so, because it seems to me like, I remember that when I first came back to the meeting, like in the first part of 60, let's see, I got busted 58. I got out at 58, I got busted 58. Went to that meeting on 59. It was right at the new year of 59. And at that time, the meeting was at Shire's Dryer. And later that year, I think that Shire's meeting folded, and I can't remember the circumstances, and Cy kept, went away, and no, Cy didn't either. I'm thinking more, well, I can't really remember for sure, because I'm trying to think when they had that television thing on Channel 4, and Cy, I remember them interviewing Cy, and they had the cameras there, and just he had his face in the shadow, so his face didn't show.
And that was involved with NA?
Yeah, but I mean, it was more about Cy than it was about NA.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But they were talking about Narcotics Anonymous,
Yeah.
but Cy was, great.
It was like, here's this guy this addict that's trying to form this group, this heroic individual trying to, it's really more about the hero figure than about the group.
Help me out. Was this the time when, in 1959, when Narcotics Anonymous pretty much died out?
I didn't think that, as far as I know, it never really died out. There was always a meeting going on, at least one meeting, Seems to me like we went from Shires, and then got Jimmy. I think Jimmy's the one that arranged for the meeting place in Moore Park. I'm not sure about that, but all I remember is, I know that in 59, when I first started going, the first meetings I went to were at Shires, and then later on, we were going to Moore Park. So I think it must have been the year when we shifted from Shires to Moore Park, and from the Cy Malis era, so to speak, to Jimmy.
And who was running?
Now, Cy had been around, they'd been around a few years, like I said.
Right.
They carried the program in to where I was at, That was my first acquaintance with NA. And that was in 57. So, I mean, Cy, that group had been around there at the Shires thing, and Scott and them, they'd been around for a few years working. And Jimmy was, I know Jimmy was there, but, I know exactly what role he was playing. I wasn't there.
This is the area here, and particularly over to my right from where I'm sitting now. Sitting right in this place right here many years ago, and trying to organize my own thoughts in order to try to understand the program we had, in order to try to see if what I was doing was right for me as well as anybody else, and to see if I could find maybe a better direction, maybe some more positive aspects of looking at the program, since you know as well as I do how depressing some of our meetings can become. We start off on a negative note, we can carry it through.
I've heard that in the beginning, Narcotics Anonymous was, pretty much strictly for bad alcoholics and heroin addicts.
Yeah, what I'm saying, the bad guys. That's what I'm saying. We had a reputation of being a bad guy.
Convict.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Misfit.
Right.
Misfit. Yeah. And sometimes we held it up by, not, I don't say pretending to be, held it up by kind of like our attitude. No fuss with us. Following our own script, especially if you're using, you're participating in illegal activities, and you're chasing the drug, and you're chasing the connection, you're chasing money, you're chasing everything, you're chasing everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets you get lost sometimes. You're talking about in terms of what happened or what didn't happen. You get lost in the shit that was going on,
The big job, I've been very fortunate in the fact that I've always been sort of optimistic. I've always been on the upside. I'm a speeder. Thank God, so is Betty. We get along well in that regard. And And I used to try to wonder, what can we do to make it any better? What can we do to improve? And I thought, from what I've learned in the program, it's what I learned. And what I'm able to offer to other people is most important. Not trying to do things for other people. They're supposed to do things for themselves. Just offer the opportunity. Offer your support. Offer your empathy in particular. Empathy in particular, because it seems as though at times we forget, we get so tied into trying to do something for somebody, you know. We're not saviors, we're not teachers, we're not preachers. We're only people who have recovered our own life, our own sanity, our own health. And this is what we can offer to other people, only an example. I think we get hung up on that sometimes.
All right, so then you get out of prison. What was your first move?
Go see the parole officer. as they instruct you to do. And get some papers signed and some places you're supposed to meet and places you're supposed to go and where you're supposed to report and all the, you know, the whole script you need to follow in order to, you know, to keep the parole officer off your back, you know. And not that they approve so much, they want to know where you're going and what you're doing, you know. And one of them was I was going to these here meetings called Narcotics Anonymous, you know. And they kind of frowned at it at first because they thought that they had all the answers as to how to deal with dope fiends and convicts and so forth. And you didn't know what you was talking about anyhow. And those places were not sanctioned by the department of anybody, you know. So they kind of frowned at, you know, what you were doing. It's, you know, they ignored it, but it has a lot to do with how the parole officer perceived what you were doing as being valuable or not valuable. And
They had no perception of that.
no, they had nothing to go by. What they got to go by, you know?
Right.
And it's kind of a new area in some ways. They probably some of the officers and so forth knew of NA or AA and those types of things, and a close association because there were groups going into institutions, but there were AA meetings. There weren't no NA meetings going in, and so they were working on other solutions in terms of how to do this thing, you know, reporting and writing letters and getting a job and holding a job, all of the above.
Gene Lukakis, between date May 19th, 1964, was from Los Angeles.
Okay.
You need more?
No,
Okay.
that's fine.
Hey, when did I first meet you, Gene?
In 1964.
In '64, at what meeting?
God, I don't remember.
Must have been Rhodes and Moore Park.
The first meeting I went to, you want me to tell you the first meeting I went to? Okay. First meeting I met a guy named Paul Stewart. I've been walking for 4 days clean. And I paused and I walked from LA to the San Fernando Valley, San Fernando. And it occurred to me, I remembered stories in institutions, you know, the AA guys would come in. And that's going to offend some people, but, you know, anyway, that's where I first heard about recovery. And they all talked about going to the Sally or the Mission or something, so I figured I had to walk back to LA. I figured the Mission had to be on Main Street. And I got to North Hollywood, and I was real tired. I sat back on a bus bench, you know, and the two cops drove by real slow and looked at me, and I got up and went through the building, across the alley, and 4 blocks later I was on the roof until they did a shift change. And it occurred to me I better see if there was an Alamo Club. I could get a cup of coffee and nobody would ask me where I came from, what my last name was, or where I was going. So I went to the North Hollywood Alamo Club on Radford Street. Paul
Radford.
Stewart was there. And he kept looking at me and said, "I know you." And I said, "No, you don't." And then he asked me if I'd been in jail. I said, "Yeah, once." God. I got over 30 felony convictions, but anyway, I said once, and he said, where were you? And I said, at the Wayside Honor Farm. And he asked me what compound I was on. I said, the upper compound. He pointed and said, you're a dope fiend. And I got up to leave. And he came, followed me out, and he said, I got something for you. And I thought he was gonna turn me on, and I didn't know if I was gonna get loaded or hit him. And he handed me a white book, an old white booklet. That's the only booklet we had. And I said, that don't work. And he said, yes, it does. He'd been clean. I think he said 5 years. And he said there were about a dozen people going to meetings, and they had 2 meetings a week in LA. And he said, I said, I'd like to see that. And he said, come home with me and I'll take you to a meeting. And it was on a Saturday night, so he took me to the Nest to an AA meeting, because there was no NA meeting. And then I met, you want last names or no?
Doug Bingham,
Yeah, Doug Bingham, Dick Herbst, Scotty somebody,
Scott Crown, Scott?
no, not Big Scott.
No.
This was another guy, he didn't have much time. Can't remember his name. And Phil, Filthy Phil, Glenn Phillips.
Slick Phil, yeah.
Yeah, Slick Phil, yeah. Anyway, so I met them,
They were all at the Nest.
yeah.
And so that was an AA meeting,
At an AA meeting.
but the NA
All the
people.
NA went there, all the junkies from the West Valley
Right.
went to that meeting. He told me, Paul told me, there's no meeting tonight, but I'll take you to one where the addicts go.
My name is Vito L. My clean date is 2/14/1960. And right now I live in the South Broward area of the South Florida region.
Thank you. Where'd you get clean? How'd you get here? So let's go to the beginning.
Well, we'll go to the beginning. We'll go to the beginning when I walked out of a dumpster. I had started using at a very, very early age in the Bronx. And it ended in the, I don't know if it's even there anymore. It was Brick Church Station in East Orange, New Jersey. And I was laying in the gutter, snow was falling, it was covering me, and people were just walking over me, like I didn't exist. And evidently somebody had some empathy, called a ambulance. I went to the emergency room, the doctors took a look at me, they didn't want to touch me because I was covered with body lice. And so they had the nurses, of course, delouse me. And when they finally diagnosed me, they told me I was suffering from both infectious and serum hepatitis for the dirty living, dirty needles. And they put me in what was known as the isolation ward. And when I got out of the isolation ward, they took me upstairs on the elevator, and I got off, and I seen this big room with bed after bed after bed, some card tables, with people standing there in green gowns. And I remember I said to the nurse, what the heck is this place? And she said, why, this is an alcoholic ward. And I took one look at her, I said, I dare you put me with them kind of sick people. Because I figured they had a problem, they couldn't stop drinking, and of course I could stop using anytime I wanted to, and that was my words to her. And her words to me was, then why didn't you? I didn't know what to say. So she says, if you don't want to go there, take your brown paper bag and you can take the elevator down and go wherever you're going. And it was still like March, and you know how it is up north, it was still cold. I'm not a fool. And I went in there. And that facility, even though there was no treatment, changed my life. During the week on a Wednesday night, a bunch of people came in and brought a meeting from AA. And I really didn't want to attend that, but I was told that if I didn't attend it, I'd take my brown paper bag and leave. So I stayed and I attended it. So I started to listen to these guys when they came in. And it was mostly guys because there wasn't very many women in that fellowship then. And when it was time for me to get out of there, I still was homeless, and they gave me this meeting list. And they told me go to meetings, and they told me they had coffee and donuts, and when you're homeless, that's a great thing, coffee and donuts.
And my name is Ronald Edward Mentor, and I was clean 6/17/64. Although I came to Narcotics Anonymous about a year prior to that at the Walla Walla State Prison. And I was clean since that date, but I don't count jail time. My sponsor kind of told me when I got out, you're clean today, and that's why I've counted it from today. I live now in Leisure World, California, which is a retirement center for elderly people like me, down in 60 miles south of Los Angeles. Well, like always, I was doing either prison time or out there on the streets hustling. I've been involved with drugs since I was 8 years old, and had been a heroin addict from the time I was 13. I don't know if you want the information about what happened in my life, but at 17, I was sentenced to prison to the electric chair. And spent 17 months on death row in Texas and got a reprieve. The federal government took over my case. It was a question of who was legally responsible, the state or the government. And they sentenced me to triple life, and I went to Alcatraz. And I spent 7 years in Alcatraz, and I was released on a state appellate court of blunder, and of course the normal thing when you got out of prison was to find your little cutie pot and all them things like that, but not me. I wanted to find some drugs. And I took a little boat across to San Francisco, and I got loaded. And I stayed loaded for 18 or 19 months. And I got involved and went back to prison in Walla Washington. And while I was doing time there was a guy who was just floating up and down the coast, kind of introducing NA to people. And he came to the prison, and he said, "I'd like to start an NA meeting there." We had an AA meeting, and my parole officer or my penal supervisor at the time said, "You know, Ed, you need to go there." He said, "Because you don't really have a problem with living, you have a problem with drugs." And I didn't think I had a problem with drugs. I love drugs. I didn't have any problem with heroin. I'd done everything I wanted to do. It took care of everything. But I went to this first meeting, and this guy's talking about staying clean, and I thought he was a little cuckoo. And he left the pamphlet. We only had a little small pamphlet, and I read it, and he told me, "Ed, you're not going to get much out of this, but you need to go to the AA meeting, because they have a big book that gives you a lot of information about our program." So I did, and it sounded interesting, but I had no reason at all to believe that I could stay on the streets clean.
My name is Sally E. My clean date is 9/1/1969.
And so, Sally, tell me about your introduction to Narcotics Anonymous.
Well, I'd spent a year in Alcoholics Anonymous trying to make it, and I couldn't do it. I'd get a few weeks. One time I think the most I got was 6 weeks. And the first meeting that I went to, I was so scared and so desperate that I just wanted something other than, I had to do something. I couldn't stand, I always used drugs because they reduced the pain of living. They helped me deal with the pain of living. And they weren't working anymore. Not only were they weren't working, but it was worse. I was miserable, abjectly miserable when I was loaded, and abjectly miserable when I was clean. And so I wandered into AA because somebody told me that that was where I should go. And the first meeting, 3 people came over and told me I couldn't talk about drugs. I looked really bad. You gotta figure, my clothes, I had like 2 changes of clothes, and they were both kind of, I was kind of dirty, and I twitched and jerked, and they kind of cleared, sometimes they clear the space around me, people would move. And so, but when I would get loaded, it would be horrible, and then I would come back and try AA again, because I heard them say that was a way of life, and so that I just couldn't get it. And finally she wasn't anywhere near as old as I am, but I thought she was old, in her little polyester dress, her little pearls, her little heels and stuff, came up to me and said, "Dear, there's a place for people like you." And I said, I was thinking in my head, yeah, right, I know. I've been in those places. I know exactly what you're talking about, jails and institutions. And she said, and she must have read my panic. And she said, no, there's a program for people like you. And she gave me this guy's card, Dave Brown, and he lived in Anaheim. And she said to call him because it was a program of Narcotics Anonymous. And I carried that guy's card around for, 5 or 6 weeks anyway, because I was afraid to call. I was afraid if he blew me off, I thought it was my last shot. And finally, just in desperation, after getting loaded one more time, I called him. And he came all the way from Anaheim to where I lived in Costa Mesa. I was living in this garage. Anyway, I was living in this guy's garage of somebody in AA who had an uncle or something who let me stay in his garage. So he came over and he took me to my first NA meeting. And when people talked there, I knew that they had been where I had been, some of them. Maybe they didn't hear voices, but I felt that I belonged there. That I would never go back to AA. I never went back to AA. And I started staying clean from then on. It was really hard, but I started staying clean.
How much time you got on the program?
I have 39 years.
39, okay. And what is your clean date?
7/7/70.
7/7. Oh man, that's a good number.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you came in the program in this area
Yes.
in San Jose here?
Yes.
Yeah.
The guy George P., who I know you've heard about.
Uh-huh.
George.
George Perry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
George told me. He said, "You know, Lou," he said, "your game is weak.
Oh wow.
You got no game. You got no." I was living in a Business Sink Hotel in Oakland, called the Alpine Hotel. Rent was, I think it was maybe $10.50 a week. I didn't pay rent.
Oh yeah.
I stole cigarettes out of supermarket, carton at a time.
Wow.
I lived off of Thompson Seedless Grapes. And I wasn't going anywhere. And I knew I wasn't going anywhere. And there was no hope for me. I didn't have any hope.
No hope.
State your name and your clean date and where you're from.
I'm Steve B. I'm from Santa Rosa, and my clean date is May 11, '66.
So Steve, where did you first hear about Narcotics Anonymous?
My doctor introduced me to Penny when I was in the hospital. He was treating me for something other than my addiction because it was illegal to treat addiction at the time. And he asked if I wanted to talk to somebody from NA, and I'd never heard of NA, so he explained a little bit about it, and I said, why not? And so Penny Kennedy showed up. She was a nurse at that hospital, and he had helped her get her license back. So she talked with me for a while, and then said that maybe I should be talking to a guy instead of a woman. And, so she told me that a guy named Gene would show up. And Gene showed up that night, and we talked for a while. Told me to give him a call when I got out of the hospital, and he'd take me to a meeting. I had some really good feelings early on, just about kind of that sort of thing, like